Commander Zathari felt all four of his hearts lurch as the emergency alert erupted across the bridge. Crimson warning lights bathed the command deck in a relentless glow while piercing alarms echoed through the warship. Officers abandoned routine stations, racing to their consoles as tactical displays filled with rapidly expanding danger zones. Something catastrophic had happened. Zathari's scaled hands flew across the command interface, pulling in the incoming reports faster than the computer could organize them. His expression hardened. The hive swarm had shattered the outer defense line. 3 colony worlds were already overrun. Billions of ravenous insect-like organisms poured across cities, forests, and oceans alike, consuming everything in their path with horrifying speed. Entire populations had vanished before rescue fleets could even respond. The Galactic Council reacted immediately. Every available warship, regardless of allegiance, territory, or political conflict, was ordered to converge on the invasion corridor. If the swarm reached the core systems, billions more lives would be lost before the month was over. But buried beneath the casualty reports was a single classified order that made even veteran officers fall silent: Operation Unified Shield. For the first time in recorded galactic history, humanity had been asked to take command. And judging by the uneasy silence spreading across the bridge, that frightened the Council almost as much as the Hive itself. The Council had approved the use of Earth's military forces. Zathari had heard stories about these humans, but had never seen one in person. Most species in the galaxy thought they were too weak to be useful in real combat. They had no natural armor, no claws, no poison, and their bodies looked soft and easy to break. The Vayan commander stood up from his chair and walked to the main viewing screen. His own people were tall and strong with thick gray skin that could stop most weapons. They had evolved on a world with high gravity and dangerous predators. Every Vayan was born ready for war. These humans came from a world with weak gravity and small animals. How could such creatures help fight the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy? 3 hours later, Zathari watched as a human ship approached his vessel. The ship looked strange compared to Vayan designs where his people built their ships thick and heavy like fortresses. The human ship was sleek and fast like a hunting blade. Strange markings covered its hull, and weapons pointed in directions that made no tactical sense. The docking bay doors opened with a loud hiss. Zathari walked down to meet these new allies, expecting to see warriors who looked ready for battle. Instead, 2 humans stepped out of their small transport ship. They were even smaller than he had imagined. The male human barely reached Zathari's chest, and the female was even shorter. Their skin looked pink and soft, like the belly of a newborn animal. The male human stepped forward and smiled, showing small white teeth. "Commander Zathari, I'm Captain Jake Morrison. This is Lieutenant Lisa Carter. We're here to help you kill some bugs." Zathari stared at the human captain. Morrison wore a simple green uniform with small metal pieces pinned to his chest. He carried no visible weapons and showed no signs of the battle scars that marked experienced Vayan warriors. Even stranger, he seemed relaxed, almost happy. Carter stood beside him, making small sounds under her breath that Zathari realized was some form of primitive music. "Captain Morrison," Zathari began using the translation device on his collar. "I must ask if you understand the nature of our enemy. The Hive Swarm has destroyed 12 worlds in the past month. Their warrior drones are 3 times the size of your people and have claws that can cut through metal." Morrison's smile grew wider. "Commander, we've read the files. We know what we're up against." He turned to Carter. "What do you think, Lisa? Sounds like fun, right?" Carter stopped her, quiet singing, and nodded. Just like the simulations back home, only with real targets. This time, Zathari felt confusion wash over him. These humans talked about fighting the galaxy's most feared enemy, like they were discussing a game. Either they were too stupid to understand the danger, or they knew something that other species did not. Over the next few hours, Zathari watched as more human ships arrived. Each one brought soldiers, who looked just as small and weak as Morrison and Carter. They gathered in the main hangar bay, checking weapons that seemed too large for their bodies, and talking in loud voices about the coming battle. Some of them were laughing. The Vayan commander called his senior officers together for a private meeting. "What do you think of our new allies?" he asked them. Captain Valar, his weapons officer, shook his head. "They look like children playing with toys. How did the council expect these creatures to help us?" Lieutenant Mayor Doc, the ship's tactical expert, studied the reports on his datapad. "Their weapons are impressive, but their bodies are too weak to use them effectively. One hit from a hive warrior will kill them instantly." Zathari looked through the viewing port at the human ships moving into formation. Something about the way they flew bothered him. The ships moved too fast, took risks that no trained pilot should take, and ignored standard safety protocols. It was like watching a pack of wild animals instead of a military force. The fleet began moving toward the contested system. Long-range sensors showed the terrible truth of what waited for them. 3 planets covered in black swarms of hive creatures. Ships filled with warrior drones moving between the worlds like dark clouds, millions of enemies that had never known defeat. As they got closer to the battle zone, Zathari received a message from Morrison. "Commander, we're reading massive enemy numbers ahead. This is going to be interesting." Interesting. That was the word the human used to describe flying into almost certain death. Zathari began to wonder if bringing these strange creatures into battle was the Council's greatest mistake, or their only hope for survival. The space battle began at dawn, ship time. Thari watched from his command deck as the joint fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the contested system. The sight that greeted them would have made any sane commander order an immediate retreat. Thousands of hive ships swarmed around the 3 colony worlds like angry insects around a disturbed nest. Each enemy vessel was the size of a small moon, covered in weapons that could crack planets. Their dark hulls seemed to absorb light itself, making them look like holes torn in the fabric of space. The Galactic Council forces numbered less than 200 ships. Even with their advanced technology and superior training, the odds were hopeless. Any reasonable military commander would have pulled back to regroup and wait for reinforcements. The humans had a different idea. All ships, this is Morrison, came the transmission from the human flagship. "We're going straight in. Target the big ones first, and don't worry about the small stuff." Zathari felt his scales stand up in alarm. "Captain Morrison, standard protocol requires a careful approach to assess enemy positioning," and Commander Morrison's voice cut through the comm channel. "With respect, your standard protocol is about to get everyone killed. Trust us on this one." Before Zathari could respond, the human ships broke formation and accelerated toward the enemy fleet at maximum speed. What happened next would stay burned in the Vayan commander's memory for the rest of his life. The lead human ship, a heavy cruiser called Tarara's Wrath, flew directly at the largest hive vessel. Zathari expected it to fire its weapons and then turn away to attack from a safe distance. Instead, the ship kept flying straight ahead, its engines glowing brighter as it built up speed. "What are they doing?" Captain Valar asked, his voice tight with confusion. Zathari realized the truth a few seconds before impact. "They're ramming it." Terra's Wrath smashed into the hive ship's forward section like a spear thrown by an angry god. The explosion lit up space for thousands of kilometers in all directions. Both ships died in the blast, but the hive vessel had been carrying thousands of warrior drones that would never reach the planet's surface. The other human ships followed their lead. Ship after ship accelerated to ramming speed and drove themselves into enemy vessels. They turned their own ships into weapons, trading one human life for hundreds of hive drones. It was tactical thinking that no civilized species would ever consider. "This is madness," Lieutenant Maillard Du whispered as he watched another human ship explode against a hive carrier. But Zathari was beginning to see the method in their madness. The ramming attacks were creating gaps in the enemy formation. Human fighters were pouring through those gaps, striking at the hive ship's weak points while they were still recovering from the impacts. The communication channels filled with human voices, and what Zathari heard made his blood run cold. The humans weren't screaming in fear or calling for help. They were laughing. "Nice hit, Danny," came one voice as a human pilot destroyed 3 enemy fighters with a single missile. "Watch this," replied another as his ship spun through a move. "That should have torn it apart from the stress." Lieutenant Lisa Carter's voice came through the comm as her fighter squadron dove into a cloud of enemy drones. "Come on, you ugly bugs. Let's dance." These creatures were enjoying themselves. They had turned the most dangerous battle of the war into some kind of game. Thari's own ship shuddered as enemy weapons found their target. Warning lights flashed across his control panels as hull sections began venting atmosphere into space. A Hive battlecruiser was closing in for the kill when two figures in spacesuits appeared outside his viewing port. Sergeant Alex Turner and Corporal Maria Rodriguez had somehow gotten outside their ship and were flying through the battle zone with nothing but small maneuvering thrusters to guide them. Enemy weapons fired all around them as they moved toward the hull breach on Zathari's ship. "What are they doing out there?" Villar demanded. "They're repairing our hull," Zathari said, unable to believe what he was seeing. The two humans worked with calm efficiency, while death flew past them in the form of energy beams and explosive projectiles. Turner welded metal plates over the hole, while Rodriguez connected new power cables to restore life support. They worked like mechanics in a peaceful shipyard instead of soldiers in the middle of a space battle. When they finished, Rodriguez's voice came through the comm system. "You're patched up, Commander. Try not to get hit in the same place twice." The battle raged for 6 hours. By the end, half the human fleet was gone, turned into clouds of glowing debris that drifted between the planets. But they had accomplished the impossible. The Hive fleet was broken, scattered, and running for the outer system. As Zathari surveyed the battlefield, he listened to the human casualty reports. Ship commanders called out the names of their dead in calm, professional voices. There was sadness in their voices, but also something else: pride. They were proud of how their people had died. Commander Morrison's voice came through the comm. "We're ready to begin the ground assault. The first planet has about 10 million Hive drones on the surface, but we can handle that." 10 million? The number hit Zathari like a physical blow. Even after everything he had just witnessed, the humans were talking about fighting 10 million enemies like it was just another job to finish. "Captain Morrison," Zeth Carey said carefully, "perhaps we should wait for reinforcements before." "Commander," Morrison interrupted, and this time his voice had changed. The friendly joking tone was gone, replaced by something cold and hard. "We didn't come here to wait. We came here to win." As the surviving ships moved toward the first planet, Zathari realized that the space battle had been just a warm-up. The real war was about to begin on the ground, and he was starting to understand that these humans fought by rules that no other species had ever imagined. The transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of New Sarin, the first colony world under Hive control. Zathari gripped his seat as explosions rocked the hull. Through the small window, he could see the planet's surface covered in black, structures that the Hive had built from the bones of dead colonists. Beside him sat Staff Sergeant Ryan Phillips, a human soldier who looked even smaller inside his heavy armor. Private Kelly Johnson checked her weapons for the third time, while Specialist Tony Garcia stared out the window with cold eyes. None of them showed any sign of fear, even though they were flying into the heart of enemy territory. 2 minutes to drop zone," called the pilot over the comm system. Phillips stood up and walked to the back of the transport where a dozen human soldiers waited. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke. "Remember what we practiced, people. The bugs like to dig tunnels under everything. We're going to use those tunnels against them. Johnson, you're on explosives. Garcia, you take point when we go underground. Everyone else, watch your sectors and keep your heads down." Zeth Carey had studied human military doctrine during the flight to the planet. Their tactics made no sense according to Veyan standards, where his people fought in organized formations. With clear command structures, humans seemed to prefer small groups that moved independently. They broke every rule of proper warfare. The transport touched down in a landing zone that had been cleared by orbital bombardment. Smoke rose from burning Hive structures, while the screams of dying drones echoed across the battlefield. The rear door dropped open, and the humans ran out into the hell that waited for them. Thari followed, his heavy armor protecting him from the acid rain that fell from the poisoned sky. The ground was covered in a black substance that the Hive used to convert organic matter into building material. Every step left smoking footprints as the acid ate through their boot soles. Within minutes, they encountered their first Hive patrol. 3 warrior drones, each the size of a ground vehicle, came around a destroyed building with claws extended and mandibles clicking. Zathari raised his plasma rifle, ready to take cover and engage in proper suppressing fire. The humans had other plans. Philip shouted something in their primitive language, and all three soldiers scattered in different directions. Instead of maintaining formation, they moved like liquid, flowing around obstacles and using the terrain to their advantage. Johnson rolled behind a pile of rubble, while Garcia climbed up the side of a damaged wall with movements that seemed impossible for a creature without claws. The hive drones, confused by targets that refused to stay in one place, hesitated for just a moment. That moment was all the humans needed. Garcia dropped from above, landing on the back of the largest drone with a combat knife in each hand. He drove both blades into the creature's nerve cluster, while Johnson's rifle found the weak spot behind another drone's head. Philip simply walked up to the third drone and placed an explosive charge against its chest before stepping back to watch it die. The entire fight lasted less than 30 seconds. "Not bad," Philip said as he reloaded his weapon. "Garcia, you're getting faster at finding the nerve clusters." "Thanks, Sarge," Garcia replied, wiping green blood off his knives. "These ones are bigger than the ones in training, but the anatomy is the same." Zathari stared at them in shock. They had just killed 3 hive warriors without taking a single casualty, and they were talking about it like they had just finished a practice exercise. The squad moved deeper into the colony, following a path that led toward the main hive complex. Along the way, they discovered something that made Zethar's stomach turn: a tunnel entrance that led down into the planet's crust. The walls were lined with the remains of human colonists that the hive had partially consumed before abandoning. "Tunnel system," Phillips observed, studying the entrance with professional interest. "Johnson, what do you think?" "Perfect for explosives work," she replied, pulling several strange devices from her pack. "If we can get deep enough, we can bring down their whole network. Garcia, you're our tunnel rat. Think you can guide us through there without getting lost?" Garcia nodded and switched on a light mounted to his helmet. "Easy day, Sarge. These bugs are predictable. They always build the same way." Zathari felt panic rising in his chest. "Staff Sergeant Phillips, surely you're not planning to enter those tunnels. It's an obvious trap. We should call for artillery support and collapse the entrance from the surface." Phillips looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than his face. "Commander, artillery won't reach their deep nests. If we want to clear this planet, we have to go where they live." The descent into the tunnel system was a journey into nightmare. The walls were covered in some kind of organic secretion that glowed with a sickly green light. Strange sounds echoed from the depths below, and the air smelled like rotting meat. Thari's people had evolved to fight in open spaces under clean skies. These narrow, dark passages made every instinct scream for retreat. The humans moved through the tunnels like they had been born in them. Garcia led the way, reading signs in the tunnel walls that Zathari couldn't even see. Johnson placed explosive charges at key structural points, while Phillips watched their rear guard. They turned the confined space from a disadvantage into a weapon. When they encountered hive drones in the tunnels, the fighting was brutal and close. The insects had no room to maneuver, and the humans used that against them. They fought with knives and bare hands when their guns were too big for the space. They bit and clawed and kicked like wild animals. But it was what happened to Johnson that showed Zathari the true nature of human soldiers. A hive drone's claw caught her in the shoulder, tearing through her armor and deep into the muscle beneath. Green poison flowed into the wound as she fell against the tunnel wall. Any reasonable soldier would have called for medical evacuation and fallen back to a safe position. Johnson pulled a small device from her belt and used her own blood to mark enemy positions on the tunnel wall. Her hands shook from pain and poison, but she continued working, giving artillery coordinates to the ships in orbit above. "Join. You need medical attention," Philip said, his voice tight with concern. "In a minute, Sarge," she replied, her voice getting weaker. "Just need to finish this calculation. If we hit these 3 points, the whole network comes down." She worked until she collapsed unconscious from blood loss. Even then, her finger remained pointing at the spot where the final charge needed to be placed. When the orbital strike came, it was precise and devastating. The tunnel network collapsed in a series of controlled explosions that trapped thousands of hive drones underground. The humans had turned a death trap into a mass grave for their enemies. As they carried Johnson back to the surface, Zathari listened to Philips talking quietly to Garcia. "She'll be fine. Medics will have her fixed up in a day or two. Then she'll be ready to do it again." "Think we'll see action like this on the next planet?" Garcia asked. "Hope so," Phillips replied. This was just getting interesting. Zathari realized with growing horror that these humans weren't just fighting a war. They were enjoying it. They had found something they were good at, and they wanted to keep doing it. The galaxy had unleashed something terrible, and he was beginning to wonder if they could ever be stopped. The second colony world of Kepler's Haven presented a different kind of nightmare. Unlike New Sarin, where the hive had built above ground, here they had converted the entire planetary crust into a vast underground city. Millions of drones moved through tunnels that stretched for thousands of kilometers beneath the surface. Traditional warfare would be impossible. ZTH Kari stood in the command tent, watching Lieutenant Colonel Peter Hayes study intelligence reports with the same expression his people used when examining interesting geological samples. The human officer seemed more curious than concerned about the tactical nightmare that faced them. "The problem," Hayes explained to the gathered commanders, "is communication. These bugs use sonic frequencies to coordinate their attacks. If we can disrupt their communications, they'll fight like individuals instead of a unified force." Captain Villar leaned forward in his chair. "How do you propose to jam signals across an entire planet? The power requirements alone would mean balance." "We're not going to jam them," Hayes interrupted with a smile that made Zathari uncomfortable. "We're going to talk to them. What happened next would haunt Zathar's dreams for years to come." Hayes had captured several hive communication drones during the fight for New Sarin. Instead of destroying them or using them for intelligence gathering, he had given them to communications specialist Carmen Lewis. She had spent days studying how the creatures transmitted information between different parts of the hive network. Lewis had made recordings of hive queens dying. The sounds were terrible beyond description, a mixture of pain and rage and fear that seemed to reach into the listener's mind and tear at something fundamental. She had somehow learned to reproduce these sounds using captured hive equipment. "The beautiful thing about hive minds," Hayes explained as Lewis prepared her equipment, "is that they share everything. Every drone will hear what we broadcast. Every single one will know that their queens are dying." The broadcast began at midnight, ship time. Lewis sent the recorded screams of dying royalty on every frequency the hive used for communication. The effect was immediate and more devastating than any weapons Ethkari had ever seen used in warfare. Across the planet's surface, hive drones began emerging from their tunnels in a state of complete panic. They moved without coordination, without purpose, driven only by the need to find and protect queens that were already dead. Some attacked each other, others simply stood motionless, overwhelmed by grief and confusion. Major Frank Coleman, the human demolitions expert, watched the chaos through his tactical display with professional satisfaction. "Beautiful work, Lewis. Now we can really hurt them." Coleman had brought Sergeant Lisa Park, a specialist in explosive psychology. Zathari had not known such a field existed until he met her. Park studied how different species reacted to explosions, not just the physical damage, but the mental effects. She had learned that hive drones communicated location information through acoustic signatures. Different sounds meant different things in their primitive language. Park had created explosive devices that produced the exact sonic patterns that meant queen in distress when they detonated. The humans began dropping these special bombs across the planet's surface. Each explosion not only caused physical damage, but also sent fake distress calls that drew more drones out of their protective tunnels. The insects came rushing toward the sounds of their dying leaders, only to find more explosions waiting for them. "It's like calling predators with bait," Park explained as she watched another group of drones run directly into a minefield. "They can't help themselves. Their instincts force them to respond." Zathari felt sick watching the slaughter. This is not warfare. This is manipulation of their most basic survival instincts. Hayes looked at him with eyes that showed no emotion at all. "Commander, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win." As the false distress calls continued, The hive's response became more desperate. They began sending their largest warriors to the surface, creatures the size of buildings that had never been seen in previous battles. These ancient guardians had been sleeping in the deepest parts of their underground cities, awakened only by the belief that their species faced extinction. The humans were ready for them. Captain Rachel Stone led a night raid against one of the massive creatures that had emerged near the planet's northern pole. Her unit moved in complete darkness, using primitive weapons like knives and clubs to avoid making sounds that might alert their target. Zathari accompanied the raid, equipped with night vision gear that let him see what the humans were doing. What he witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about civilized behavior. Stone's soldiers didn't just kill the giant hive guardian. They carefully carved symbols into its body while it was still alive, using the creature's own defensive secretions to create marks that would be visible to other drones. The symbols told a story in the hive's visual language, a message that said their greatest protectors were weak and helpless. When other hive forces found the body, they didn't just see a dead guardian, they saw proof that nothing could protect them from the humans. The psychological effect spread through their ranks like a virus, breaking their will to fight before the physical battle even began. "Why do you leave them arranged like this?" Zethkari asked as Stone's team positioned the body in a specific pattern. "Because they'll tell the story to others," Stone replied, wiping green blood from her knife. "Fear is a weapon, Commander. Sometimes it's more effective than bullets." The most disturbing part was listening to the humans talk about their kills. They kept count, turning death into a competition. Corporal Mike Chen had 17 confirmed kills. Sergeant Kate Brown had 23. They discussed their techniques like artists comparing different styles of painting. "The trick with the big ones," Chen explained to a younger soldier, "is to go for the nerve clusters behind their front legs. Takes longer, but they stay conscious while they die. Makes more noise that way." "What about the medium-sized drones?" the younger soldier asked. "Those are easy. Just cut the communication tentacles and they lose coordination. Then you can take your time." They were teaching each other how to kill more efficiently, how to cause more fear, how to break their enemies, minds as well as their bodies. War had become a science for them, and they were eager students. As the second planet fell to human tactics, Zathari realized that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had asked these creatures to fight their war for them, not understanding what they were unleashing. The humans didn't just defeat their enemies, they studied them, learned their weaknesses, and then used that knowledge to destroy them in ways that went far beyond simple killing. The hive swarm had been the galaxy's nightmare for generations. But watching the humans work, Zathari began to understand that there were worse things than being killed by monsters. There was being killed by creatures who made an art form out of death, who found beauty in the perfect application of violence, who could look at any living thing and see exactly how to break it. The humans were not just winning the war, they were rewriting the rules of what war could be, and Zathari feared that the galaxy would never be the same. The third colony world of Harmony's End was different from the others. Here, the hive had dug so deep that their tunnels reached the planet's molten core. Seismic readings showed a network of passages that extended through the entire planetary crust, creating a three-dimensional maze that no conventional army could ever clear. General Patricia Scott stood before a holographic display that showed the planet's internal structure, her face lit by the glow of tactical projections. Around her, alien commanders from a dozen species studied the same data with growing despair. The scale of the underground network was beyond anything they had encountered before. "The mathematics are simple," announced Admiral Keithmore of the Centauri Defense Force. "Even with our combined fleets, we lack the firepower to penetrate those depths. We should evacuate the remaining civilian populations and establish a quarantine zone." "That's quitting," Scott replied without taking her eyes off the display. "And humans don't quit." Zathari watched the human general trace her finger along the planet's geological weak points. She was studying something that the other commanders had missed, looking at the world not as a military target, but as a system that could be manipulated. "General Scott," he said carefully, "surely you're not considering what I think you're considering." Scott turned to face the assembled commanders with eyes that showed no doubt at all. "I'm going to crack this planet open like an egg. We're going to flood those tunnels with molten rock and cook every bug from the inside out." The silence that followed was complete. Even the background hum of electronics seemed to stop as the implications of her words sank in. "That's impossible," whispered Colonel Vexar from his position near the tactical display. "The energy requirements alone would not using energy weapons," Scott interrupted. "We're using physics. This planet sits on top of massive geological stress points. A few precisely placed seismic charges will do the rest." She activated a new display that showed the locations where explosive charges would need to be placed. Each point was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by millions of Hive drones. Getting teams to those positions would require volunteers to walk into certain depth. "The charges have to be placed manually," Scott continued. "Remote detonation systems won't work at those depths. Each team will need to stay with their charges until detonation to make sure they go off at exactly the right time." Zathari felt his heart stopped beating for a moment. "General, you're describing a suicide mission." "Multiple suicide missions." "Yes," Scott replied with no emotion in her voice. "I am." What happened next would prove to Zathari that humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of their weapons or their tactics, but because of their willingness to die for victory. Scott asked for volunteers. She explained clearly that this was a one-way mission, that the teams would not survive the planetary cracking, that their deaths would be horrible and certain. She gave every human soldier multiple chances to decline without shame. Every single human in the room volunteered. "I can't take all of you," Scott said, and Zathari heard something like sadness in her voice for the first time. "I only need 12 teams. The rest of you will have to stay behind and help with evacuation." The humans began arguing about who would get to die. They competed for the right to walk into certain death, like other species competed for promotions or rewards. Zathari listened to soldiers with families, with children, with entire lives ahead of them, begging for the chance to sacrifice everything for a military objective. Major Scott Davis was chosen to lead the first team. Captain Jennifer Walsh took the second. These were experienced officers who could have stayed safe in command positions, but they insisted on taking the most dangerous assignments for themselves. The mission began at dawn, ship time. 12 teams of human soldiers dropped into different parts of the planet's surface, each carrying enough explosives to trigger localized earthquakes. Their job was to reach specific coordinates deep underground and detonate their charges simultaneously. Zathari monitored their progress from orbit, listening to their communications as they fought their way through endless swarms of Hive drones. The humans moved through enemy territory like ghosts, using stealth and speed to avoid major confrontations until they reached their target zones. Davis's team was the first to reach their position, a deep cavern system that connected to 3 major tunnel networks. They set up their charges with mechanical precision, while Hive warriors closed in from all directions. "Explosives are in position," Davis reported over the comm. "Beginning final countdown sequence, sir," came the voice of his communications. "Officer Sergeant Paul Miller, we've got movement in all the surrounding tunnels. Looks like every bug on this level is heading our way." "How long until they reach us?" Davis asked. 2 minutes, maybe 3. "Perfect timing," Davis replied. "Miller, send our coordinates to Orbital Command and request immediate artillery support on our position." Zathari leaned forward in his command chair. Did he just request artillery fire on his own location? The answer came from Miller himself. "Confirmed Orbital Command. Fire mission on our coordinates. Danger close is not a factor." They were calling down explosions on their own heads. Not by accident, not because they were surrounded and had no choice, but as part of their plan. They were using their own deaths as weapons. Similar reports came in from other teams across the planet. Walsh's team had reached their target, but was cut off by Hive reinforcements. Instead of requesting extraction, she asked for her position to be marked as a secondary target for the seismic charges. "If our bombs don't finish the job," she transmitted, "make sure you drop a big one right on top of us." Team after team reached their positions and set up their explosives. Some were overrun by Hive forces before they could complete their missions. Others were trapped in collapsed tunnels. All of them continued working until their last breath, adjusting explosive yields and timing sequences. Even as they died, Corporal Amy Foster's final transmission came from the deepest position, nearly at the planet's core. Charges are armed and ready. The math says this will create a chain reaction all the way to the surface. If anyone is listening up there, you might want to get farther away from the planet. Her voice was calm and steady as she reported her own approaching death. Timer is set for 60 seconds. It's been an honor serving with you all. The synchronized detonation began exactly on schedule. 12 massive explosions triggered geological events that had been building pressure for millions of years. The planet's crust cracked like broken glass as molten rock erupted from deep caverns into the hive tunnel systems. From orbit, Zathari watched a world die. Rivers of lava flowed through underground passages that had taken the hive decades to build. The temperature in those tunnels rose to levels that would melt metal and boil stone. Every living thing below the surface was incinerated in minutes. The humans had achieved total victory at the cost of 144 lives. They had destroyed an enemy force of millions by sacrificing less than 200 soldiers. The mathematical efficiency was stunning and terrible. As reports came in confirming the elimination of all hive forces on the planet, Scott's voice came over the general communication channel. All teams, this is command. Mission accomplished. The planet is clear. There was pride in her voice, but also something else. Satisfaction. The humans had found a problem that seemed impossible to solve, and they had solved it by thinking in ways that no other species would consider. General, Zathari said quietly, was this victory worth the cost? Scott looked at him with eyes that seemed to see something he couldn't understand. Commander, this wasn't just victory. This was a message. Every species in the galaxy will hear about what happened here. They'll know that humans don't just fight wars. We end them. As the fleet prepared to leave the dead world behind, Zathari realized that the galaxy had gained powerful allies who were more terrifying than the enemies they had just defeated. The humans didn't just win battles, they erased their opponents from existence, and they did it with a smile. The debriefing took place aboard the Galactic Council flagship 3 days after the destruction of Harmony's End. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the main conference chamber to discuss what they had witnessed during the campaign against the hive swarm. Sari sat in his designated seat, still trying to process everything he had seen around him. Other commanders spoke in quiet voices about casualty reports and tactical assessments, but the numbers seemed meaningless compared to the larger questions that the human involvement had raised. The final count was staggering in its efficiency. 3 colony worlds cleared of hive infestation, estimated enemy casualties, 47 million warrior drones, 3,000 breeding queens, and countless support organisms. Human casualties, 216 killed in action, 112 wounded. Colonel William Grant, the senior human representative, stood at the front of the chamber presenting his after-action report. He spoke in the same calm, professional tone that Zathari had heard from all human officers during the campaign. The hive swarm represented a conventional asymmetric threat, Grant explained to the assembled delegates. Large numbers, limited tactical flexibility, predictable behavioral patterns, standard human doctrine proved effective against their command structure. Ambassador Yelnara of the Riel Confederacy raised one of her 4 arms. Colonel Grant, your forces sustained significant casualties during the operation. How do you justify those losses? With respect, Ambassador, we consider those losses to be minimal for an operation of this scope, Grant replied. Human military doctrine prioritizes mission success over individual survival. Our personnel understand this and accept it as part of their service. Thari found himself standing up without realizing it. Colonel, during the final assault, your soldiers called down artillery strikes on their own positions. They deliberately chose to die rather than retreat. This is not normal military behavior. Grant looked at him with the same expression he might use when discussing technical specifications for equipment. Commander Zathari, human tactical doctrine is based on achieving victory regardless of cost. Retreat is only considered when it serves the larger strategic objective. In this case, retreat would have meant mission failure. But they were laughing, Zathari said, his voice rising despite his attempt to stay calm. Your soldiers were enjoying themselves during combat. They turned killing into a competition. Yes, Grant replied simply. Morale is an important factor in combat effectiveness. Our people find satisfaction in performing their duties well. The casual way Grant spoke about systematic killing sent chills through Zathar's body. This human officer was discussing the destruction of entire species like it was a routine maintenance procedure. Admiral Keithmore leaned forward in his chair. Colonel Grant, surely you must understand that other species find your methods disturbing. The psychological warfare, the willingness to die for tactical advantage, the apparent enjoyment of violence. These are not characteristics that most civilized beings consider normal. Grant nodded, as if he expected this question. Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding about human nature. You asked us to help you fight a war against an enemy that threatened galactic civilization. We agreed to do that job. The methods we used were chosen specifically to minimize casualties among Allied forces and civilian populations. Minimize casualties, Ambassador Yelnara repeated. You destroyed an entire planet. We eliminated a threat that had already killed billions of civilians across 12 worlds. Grant corrected. The planet itself was uninhabitable after hive infestation anyway. We simply made sure the threat could never spread from there. Sari felt a cold understanding spreading through his mind. Colonel, you said these methods were chosen to minimize Allied casualties. Are you telling us that humans have other methods that are more destructive? Grant's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Commander, the weapons and tactics we used in this campaign were selected from our limited engagement protocols. We chose them because they would be effective against the hive while causing minimal trauma to our allies who might witness our operations. Limited engagement protocols, Admiral Keith said slowly. What does that mean? It means we held back, Grant explained. Human military doctrine includes escalation procedures that we didn't need to use against the hive. The enemy was technologically inferior and tactically predictable. We could achieve victory using conventional methods. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The devastating efficiency that had terrified Zathari during the campaign had been the humans fighting with restraints in place. Colonel Zathari said carefully, "What would have happened if the hive had been more dangerous? If they had posed a greater threat?" Grant looked around the chamber at the faces of dozens of species who had thought they understood what they were dealing with. Then we would have used different methods. Humans have been fighting wars for our entire evolutionary history. Commander, we've learned to scale our response to match the level of threat we face. And if someone threatened Earth itself, Admiral Keithmore asked, then that someone would learn why we're the only species on our planet that survived long enough to reach the stars. Grant replied with no emotion at all. As the debriefing continued, Zathari listened to the humans answer questions about their casualties, their tactics, and their plans for future operations. What disturbed him most was their attitude toward their own losses. They spoke about their dead with respect and sadness, but also with pride in how those deaths had contributed to victory. The human replacements had already arrived. Fresh soldiers eager to take the places of those who had died on Harmony's end. They weren't mourning their losses or reconsidering their tactics. They were asking where the next threat might emerge. Captain Jake Morrison, who had somehow survived the space battle that destroyed half his fleet, approached Zathari after the formal session ended. "Commander, I wanted to thank you for fighting alongside us," Morrison said. "Your people showed real courage out there." "Captain," Zathari replied, "I have to ask, do your people ever feel fear?" Morrison smiled, the same friendly smile that had confused Zakari during their first meeting. "Of course we do, Commander. Fear keeps you alive in combat, but we've learned that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid. And what needs to be done? Whatever it takes to protect the people we care about," Morrison said. "That's what humans do, Commander. We find out what threatens our friends and our families, and then we remove that threat permanently." As the human ships prepared to return to Earth, Zethgari found himself in his private quarters writing his final report on the campaign. The words came slowly as he tried to capture the full scope of what he had witnessed. The hive swarm had been the galaxy's greatest nightmare for generations. They had destroyed worlds, consumed civilizations, and resisted every attempt to stop their expansion. It had taken the combined fleets of 12 species just to slow them down. The humans had eliminated them in less than a week, But the victory had come at a cost that went beyond simple casualty numbers. The galaxy now knew that there was a species among them that could wage war with efficiency that bordered on art. They had seen creatures who could look at any enemy and find ways to destroy them that went far beyond simple killing. Sathari concluded his report with a recommendation that would shape galactic policy for generations to come. The human alliance should be maintained at all costs, he wrote, because there were only two types of species in the galaxy now: those who were friends with humanity and those who would eventually be conquered by them. The most terrifying realization was that the humans didn't seem to understand how frightening they were. They saw themselves as protectors, as allies who had simply done their job. They didn't realize that they had revealed themselves to be the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever known. As Zathari sealed his report and prepared it for transmission to the Galactic Council, he reflected on the greatest irony of the entire campaign. The galaxy had asked the humans to help them fight monsters, never realizing that they were inviting even more dangerous monsters to join their cause. The difference was that these monsters fought for the right side, and that was the only thing that would let any of them sleep peacefully in the years to come.